There's a bird in your yard that keeps choosing the spot nearest to you. Not the nearest to the food, not the best view, the perch closest to where you are when you are in the yard. You've probably noticed it without putting words to it. Welcome to Backyard Bird Mind. Subscribe if you're new. That positioning is not random. It's a behavioral choice that required a specific classification, and you are the reason it happened. Start with what positioning means for a bird. Every wild bird in a given environment maintains what researchers call a threat gradient, a continuous spatial map of the landscape organized by perceived danger. Elements that represent potential threats sit at one end of the gradient: predators, unfamiliar animals, sudden movements, novel objects. Elements that have been assessed and found safe sit at the other end. The bird moves through its environment according to this gradient, staying close to safe elements and maintaining distance from threatening ones. This is not. There's a bird in your yard that keeps choosing the spot nearest to you. Not the nearest to the food, not the best view, the perch closest to where you are when you are in the yard. You've probably noticed it without putting words to it. Welcome to Backyard Bird Mind. Subscribe if you're new. That positioning is not random. It's a behavioral choice that required a specific classification, and you are the reason it happened. Start with what positioning means for a bird. Every wild bird in a given environment maintains what researchers call a threat gradient, a continuous spatial map of the landscape organized by perceived danger. Elements that represent potential threats sit at one end of the gradient: predators, unfamiliar animals, sudden movements, novel objects. Elements that have been assessed and found safe sit at the other end. The bird moves through its environment according to this gradient, staying close to safe elements and maintaining distance from threatening ones. This is not a conscious decision the bird makes moment to moment. It is a continuous, automatic orientation towards safety and away from danger, running in the background of everything the bird does. Here is what changes when a bird has built a trust relationship with a specific human. That human gets added to the safe end of the gradient, not as a neutral element, something the bird tolerates, but as a positive anchor, a source of reliable safety in the environment. And once a human occupies that position on the gradient, the spatial logic of the bird's movement changes. The bird doesn't just tolerate the human's proximity, it begins to use the human as a reference point. The safest spot in the yard becomes, in part, the spot near the person who has been classified as safe. Consider how significant this is. For most of its evolutionary history, a bird the size of a chickadee or a titmouse would never have had a reason to treat a large mammal as a safe anchor. Large mammals were either predators or potential predators, things to be avoided, things that triggered the flight response. The birds that survived and reproduced were the ones that stayed away from large animals, not the ones that sought out their proximity. That behavioral inheritance is still present in every bird that visits your feeder. The default response to a large mammal-sized shape approaching is to flee. What trust building does is override that default for a specific individual, not for all large mammals, just for this one. The bird's cognitive system has accumulated enough evidence about you specifically that it has reclassified you from the default potential threat category into a category that doesn't exist in the wild, a large mammal that is not a threat and whose proximity actually reduces the threat from other sources. You become the exception, and the spatial behavior the bird shows around you reflects that exception. It moves toward you rather than away, chooses the spot nearest to you rather than the spot farthest from you, uses your presence as a navigational anchor rather than a signal to increase distance. This shift is subtle but measurable. Researchers studying the spatial behavior of birds in environments with trusted humans have found that birds that have established a trust relationship with a specific person show a statistically significant tendency to position themselves closer to that person than would be predicted by the food distribution alone. In other words, when you account for where the feeders are and which branches offer the best vantage points, the birds in the study were still choosing to be nearer to the trusted human than the food and perch locations alone would explain. The proximity is a choice, and it is a choice the bird makes because it has classified that person as a positive element of the spatial landscape, not just safe, but actively advantageous to be near. What does that mean in practice? Think about the bird that is always on the branch nearest to you when you fill the feeder, the one that lands in the tree directly above where you're sitting, the one that shows up on the fence post closest to where you're standing when you're working in the yard.
That bird is not choosing those positions for the food or the view. It is choosing them because you are there, and being near you has been classified as something the bird prefers over the available alternatives. This preference has a specific mechanism. Safety in a bird's environment is not uniformly distributed. Some locations are safer than others: taller perches, denser cover, proximity to escape routes. But the presence of a trusted, familiar human adds a layer of safety assessment that is independent of physical location. A branch that is 5 feet from a trusted human carries a lower threat assessment than an identical branch 20 feet away from the same human, because the trusted person's proximity provides an additional layer of threat detection. The bird is in effect borrowing the person's safety classification, using the known safe human as a buffer against the environmental uncertainties the bird cannot fully assess on its own. This is why the behavior looks the way it does. The bird that perches near you isn't performing.
It isn't seeking interaction or food. It is making a rational spatial decision based on the threat map it carries. The area near this specific person has been assessed as more favorable than the alternative positions, and the positioning reflects that assessment. The borrowed safety effect extends the bird's effective safe zone. When you are in your yard, the entire area within comfortable visual range of you carries a slightly reduced threat level for the birds that have classified you as safe. Other birds that approach your general vicinity benefit indirectly from the presence of a known safe human in the space. The bird that has been there longest and trusts you most closely models this effect, staying nearest, while birds at the edges of the relationship maintain slightly more distance. The spatial distribution of your flock on any given morning is in part a map of how deeply each individual has come to trust you. If this is the kind of thing that makes you look at the bird on the nearest branch differently, subscribe to Backyard Bird Mind and share this with someone who spends time in their yard. Every week there's something here that changes how the ordinary moments outside feel. The practical version of this is something you can test for yourself as soon as tomorrow morning. When you go out to your yard, notice where the birds position themselves as you move through the space. Don't approach them, just move normally, filling the feeder, sitting in your chair, walking your usual path. Watch the bird that is consistently in the nearest available spot relative to your location. Not the same spot every time. Birds don't operate with that kind of mechanical regularity, but the nearest available spot, the branch closest to you in the tree you pass, the fence post nearest to where you settle. Most people who do this for the first time experience a small but genuine shift in how the yard feels. The birds were already there, the positioning was already happening, but looking for it with intention, watching which bird consistently ends up closest, noticing how quickly it moves to maintain proximity when you shift position, changes what the ordinary morning looks like. The yard doesn't change, the relationship doesn't change, your awareness of it does. And what you become aware of is that you have been the anchor of this bird's spatial behavior every morning of the relationship, and the bird has been demonstrating that consistently, in the only language it has, in a yard you both share. That bird is running its threat gradient in real time, and every time it chooses the nearest spot, it is registering the verdict it has reached about you, that the space near you is the best space available, that the slight additional proximity to a large mammal is worth it because that specific mammal has been assessed as not a threat, and that being near you is, on balance, better than the alternatives. Watch it for a few days and you will likely notice that the same individual comes to the nearest position most consistently. The other birds may come close, but the same one tends to come closest most often. That individual has the deepest file on you, the most accumulated evidence that your proximity is safe, and it expresses that assessment through more consistent and more close positioning than the birds whose files on you are less complete. This individual variation is worth paying attention to because it gives you a readable map of where different birds are in their relationship with you. The one that consistently comes closest has classified you most completely. The one that stays at medium range is still accumulating data. The one that keeps its distance is either new to the yard or has not yet spent enough time near you to update its default threat classification. All of them can be watched from the same position, and what you see in the distribution of distances is the current state of multiple ongoing assessments of the same person. The bird that positions itself nearest to you is not the boldest bird. It is the most informed bird. It has the most evidence, and the evidence all points in the same direction, that you, specifically, in this yard, at this feeder, are the safest thing in its environment. The bird that positioned itself nearest to you this morning did it because of something you built. Not deliberately, not by performing any specific behavior intended to produce this outcome,
but through the accumulated weight of every morning you showed up, every movement you made at a pace that didn't trigger alarm, every sound you produced that registered as familiar rather than threatening, every morning of ordinary behavior in the ordinary yard where this bird lives its life. You didn't decide to build a relationship with a specific bird. You built one anyway, and the evidence of it is visible in a way most people never stop to read, in the spatial map of where that bird chooses to stand every morning you're outside, in the consistent preference for the